I'm going to be sculpting the most iconic character from World of Warcraft. That begs the obvious question, who the hell exactly is the most iconic character? There are some obvious ones that pop into mind, Arthas, Thrall, Jaina, Sylvanas, Illidan, but to me these are Warcraft 3 characters more than they are WoW characters. They've all had their origins and their best moments in Reign of Chaos or Frozen Throne. What does that matter, you might be saying, and I kinda hear you, but really we're gonna be letting these nephews bully us into diminishing the influence of Warcraft 3? It is way too important in the grand scheme of gaming to simply just ignore or lump together with WoW. Warcraft 3 is one of those butterflies you just can't be going around stomping when you go back in time. Like, y'all know that Dota came from Warcraft 3, right? Countless tower defense games, puzzle games, Mafia clones, and I don't know, one of the most important, if not the most important MMO ever. So all that to say, Warcraft 3 and WoW, two different games. So what does that really mean for this project? Most likely, all of the characters you might be thinking as an icon of WoW probably do not qualify. And if you think that's like a bad stance or a bad take, then just consider how you interact with these characters in-game. Because in WoW, more often than not, these amazing characters, these heroes that everybody knows, are just standing around in capital cities, occasionally giving and taking quests here and there. But now in Warcraft 3, you get to control these heroes, cast their abilities, hear their voice lines, learn about their personalities, watch them interact with each other through a dynamically developing story. Like, you see where this is going, right? I know I'm getting weirdly geeky and exclusive about these definitions, so to speak, but hey, I figured if I'm gonna spend all this time to do this, I might as well do it right. Now I can go on discrediting these legendary characters, but to what end if I don't propose an opposition? If not them, who am I thinking is actually the most iconic character in World of Warcraft? Oh yeah, I'm dead serious. The WoW opening cinematic is so damn good. It's so influential, so iconic, so, to use a time capsule of a slang, boss. No, it pones so damn hard. The building up with the narration to the first moment you see the Dwarf Hunter, Bear Companion, Ironforge. We are immediately greeted with a familiar fantasy character and situation. Just a good old classic dwarf from the snow-peaked mountains, Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons style. Like, you already know this dwarf comes from like a historic family with a mining background and just likes to kick back at a local tavern with a stout of mead on his days off. And really, the driving force of that opening cinematic, for me, is the first character that we see, the Dwarf Hunter. That first scene just gets the player's mindset into the right place, ready to embark on an epic high fantasy adventure. Any original vanilla WoW players that had the fortune to go on one of these adventures, I personally guarantee you that they get chills every time they still see the opening cinematic. Some might even weep. Hell, I'll weep for that. So, the goal of this project is to create a digital diorama that captures what I think the Dwarf Hunter managed to accomplish, which is a delicate fusion between that sense of epic adventure and a level of familiarity. The scale of adventure that they allude to doesn't seem like a cartoonishly exaggerated depiction. It's not a parody or making fun of RPGs, rather it actually feels grounded and small, like you're just a citizen of Azeroth. So I'm gonna try and emulate that, or at least use that as the guiding light when making decisions for this diorama. Now once I've done a bit of research, gathered references, I start as I always do, with a sphere. At the beginning, I like to start very loosely, quick sketches, very non-committal. I'm trying to figure out what the general pose and composition might be. I'm looking for potential angles that best delivers the story of the diorama. You know, do I like the dwarf's cape getting caught in the wind a bit, or just hanging down by his side? It seems minute and non-consequential, but put together about 100 of these little decisions and it starts to add up to a particular vibe and direction. When first trying to figure out a composition in 3D, I like to first sketch out one of the bigger pieces that's not the main character, so it can serve as like a solid foundation for the rest of the piece to develop around it. And in this particular case, it's gonna be the Bear Companion. And I don't know if this happens to any other creatives out there, but for me, during the sketching phase, I go into it with a lot of energy and, I'm super into the idea and the concept. I'm thinking about all the different possibilities the project can go in. But damn, at the beginning, it could just look like straight ass sometimes. It honestly feels like I'm working to get further along in the project simply so I don't have to stare at some truly horrifying looking things. And I've seen some things. But every once in a while, I luck into something nice at the beginning. I suppose it can't always be flops. And this little bear sketch, my wife freaking loved it. She wanted me to 3D print the damn thing. She joked she was gonna buy me a 3D printer just for this little bear blob. She loved it so much that she actually got super sad when I started to detail out the bear to look more like, the bear. And damn, all that effort and the quick 10-minute sketch is still more beloved. But honestly, I think there was a valuable piece of insight in that offhanded comment from my wife, because going from the sketches to the rest of the piece, it's a bit ambiguous when the model is considered complete. If the sketch is considered the first pass, then in the second pass you add some details, and in the third even more details. Theoretically, this could just go on forever. This is probably where the idea that art is never finished comes from. I'm sure every medium runs into a different version of this where you get to a point where you can just iterate forever. Obviously, I don't want to and can't do that, so I'm gonna try and channel that sketch placeholder bear energy. Simplify, get to the core essence, 2 to 3 passes, tops. As I finish sculpting out the overall shapes and proportions of the Dwarf Hunter, it's always nice to use great references when moving on to the polishing phase. It makes this stage a lot easier because I don't have to do the heavy lifting of figuring out what each armor piece looks like and how they fit together. In particular with this one, I really love how the leather shirt fits under the leather/plate chest harness thing, which is tucked under the iconic green cloak. Or little details like a kill count scratched onto the wooden part of the rifle. That's something I probably wouldn't even have noticed just looking at the concept art, but sculpting it actually helped me pay attention to, every little element that goes into building the personalities or the character of this Dwarf Hunter. So while I'm sculpting out the rest of the Dwarf Hunter, if I could just geek out about vanilla WoW art for a moment, because I don't really hear anyone talk about it that much, and if they do, it's very surface level, it feels great, it looks cozy. But to me, WoW's beautifully unique art style is going to be the longest lasting influence of WoW. It's going to outlast WoW's gameplay, social impact, what have you. And within that art style, I'm not saying it's the only aspect, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the technical limitations of making an MMO back in the early 2000s is what pushed all these creative masters to their limits, culminating in what can only be described as a masterpiece. I don't want to bore you all with the nitty-gritty, but even at a glance you must know that WoW was extremely restricted in the technology it could use, so the old computers could render the world in real time. That limited rendering capabilities didn't allow for normal maps, ambient occlusions, roughness, specular, or any of that modern fanciness, the modern standard. WoW had just one texture map. Just think about that. For some comparisons, modern 3D modeling and rendering practices generally make use of at least 3 to 4 different texture maps at 3 to 4 times the size of WoW's one texture map. As a result, they had to hand paint a lot of details as textures, but in turn this actually helps the low poly models create an extremely clean silhouette, which enforces that stylish cartoony look. It makes the models and the world look artistically intentional. It's just insane to think about the types of hurdles they had to overcome, but I suppose that's what makes WoW's art so legendary. That need to paint every model not just with color, but to draw in some details the modeling couldn't do, and to make sure the different materials are easily readable. It's an absolute masterclass, and it's no wonder why so many artists have been influenced by it. And this art style has really defined and set the standard for hand-painted low-poly models across the industry. I think everyone knew when they first saw WoW that the art style was something special, but it was impossible to know to what extent it would have influenced other artists and game. And now we know that so many games have been so obviously influenced by WoW, like Torchlight, WildStar, League of Legends, all took huge inspirations from WoW's art styles and just ran with it, some more successful than others. Even games like Fortnite, FF14, Breath of the Wild are an evolution of what vanilla WoW had figured out years ago, which is that style and design in 3D are more important than poly count, texture map size, PBR, ray tracing, or any other technical jargon, it's certainly why WoW's graphics haven't aged at all, even while Crisis has. So even to this day, WoW's art style is held in extremely high regard, and it's what people remember fondly about WoW. It's a classic example of technical limitation breeding creative solutions. It's always about style. It always has been, and it always will be. Alright, geek session over. I'm allowed one per video, right? Getting back to the sculpt, I finished up the bear using some amazing references from the artists at Disney that sculpted these amazing clay models for Brother Bear. I've never seen that movie, and honestly I've never even seen it mentioned in Disney Plus, so that's a bit unfortunate, but they had some amazing talented artists working on that movie apparently, because the references are fantastic. And for the background, obviously I'm going with Ironforge. I just love the aesthetics of Ironforge, the way it's built or carved probably into the side of the mountain. Dun Morogh already is one of the coziest places on Azeroth. The perpetual snow just gives that cozy Christmas vibes, and on top of that you're telling me that Capital City is going to be tucked snugly into the mountainside with the little warm forge at the belly of it. Like, there's no competition here. So yeah, at this point the sculpting is more or less done. I'm gonna transfer it over to Blender and get it all set up and ready to be textured and painted a little bit. I'm not particularly versed with Blender, so this will be exciting to see what I can manage, but I saw a couple of tutorials that I wanted to try out, and so let's see how the hand painting goes. I suppose what I really discovered with this project is that I just can't get over their incredible sense of design and concept. I'm so curious how a team of artists just got the concept so right. And I don't even know an eloquent way of talking about it. Just simply put, WoW's design just looks right. When I think about an orc warrior or a troll shaman, the WoW's version just seems more right than wrong. Sure, it's stylized like we talked about, but the design of everything, the way everything looks and feels is so on point. It sounds simple when you're saying it out loud, but it's not. I've tried. It's tricky to make something look like what it's supposed to. Now add an element of fantasy, and you've got yourself an incredibly difficult task. So don't sleep on the fact that these artists made you go, of course that's what an orc looks like, or a water elemental, because these things don't have real life references. And yet they've done such an excellent job that it feels obvious that their design is the way it should be for a fictional fantasy world. And so when seeing all of those designs, concepts, models, texturing, animation put together into one world, it has an amazing effect of truly inspiring you. It speaks to one's creativity, whether you are a creative person or not. The world satisfies the fantasy so well, and it does an amazing job of making the players feel like they've peeked into an actual breathing other world. So all that being said, and all that sculpting and painting being done, what have I learned? What's the main takeaway? Well, first of all, maybe the Dwarf Hunter is not the most iconic hero of WoW, and you know, I can admit that. But it's absolutely reinvigorating for me to discover, or just rediscover, how good WoW's art is. It's incredible to me that I first saw this 20 years ago, and 20 years later, I'm still awestruck by how well executed the art style is and how well put together the world is. Going back and playing through Classic again just reminded that the design and execution is so important. It should be a core tenet in my projects going forward, to just focus on the truth, for a lack of a better word. If I'm going to be making a Dwarf Hunter, I should truthfully try my best to just make them look like a Dwarf Hunter. Whatever ends up being my next project, I should remember what the WoW dev team has shown me worked and continues to work 20 years later. Design, execution, wonder.